My rich ex-boyfriend died and left a jeopardy game to determine who'd inherit his fortune. The lawyer's office was packed with Charlie's relatives and ex-girlfriends. I sat in the back hoping nobody would notice me. His mother kept shooting daggers my way. She'd always blamed me for the breakup, and now she blamed me for much worse. Mr. Charlie Williams left specific instructions, the lawyer announced. His $670,000 estate will be distributed based on your performance in this jeopardy game. His brother scoffed. This is insane, and she shouldn't even be here. He pointed at me. Not after what she did. Miss A. Myers was specifically invited, the lawyer continued, setting up the game board. Categories appeared: Charlie's habits, medical history, final months, personal secrets, and that night. First question for 100. Charlie's morning routine included this specific drink. His sister buzzed. Protein shake. Incorrect. I buzzed reluctantly. Green tea with honey. No caffeine after his diagnosis. What diagnosis? His mother's voice was sharp. The lawyer continued without answering. More questions flew by. I knew them all. His Thursday therapy appointments. The meditation app he used. Why he really sold his motorcycle. Each correct answer made his family angrier. She stalked him, Charlie's brother muttered. That's how she knows this. We moved through categories. Medical history revealed his anxiety medication. Final months showed how isolated he'd become. Personal secrets exposed things his family never knew. With each answer, their suspicion grew. Daily double in medical history. What medication was Charlie taking? I buzzed. Sertraline, 100 milligrams daily. His mother exploded. If you knew about his medication, then you knew what would happen if he mixed it with anything. You knew and you let him. Please hold comments until the end, the lawyer said firmly. The game continued, but the atmosphere was electric with accusation. Every answer I gave correctly felt like another nail in my coffin. His family whispered among themselves, plotting. When we reached that night for 500, the room went silent. What beverage did Charlie consume at Amanda's apartment? I buzzed. Chamomile tea with honey. You gave him tea knowing he had to drive, his sister screamed, knowing it would make him drowsy with his medication. The lawyer raised his hand for silence. We're not finished. Final Jeopardy category, the truth. Everyone grabbed their pens. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes burning into me. His mother was already on the phone with someone, probably police. Please make your wagers, the lawyer instructed. I bet everything. What did it matter now? They'd already decided I was guilty. The forensic searches I'd done trying to help Charlie find safer medications. The texts begging him to come over that night. It all looked like premeditation. Final Jeopardy question. What did Charlie take after leaving Amanda's apartment? His family scribbled various answers. Alcohol, more tea, sleeping pills. They were all guessing what they thought I'd given him, what they believed I'd done to cause the accident. I wrote my answer knowing it would damn me either way. The timer buzzed. Let's see the answers. His brother. Alcohol. Incorrect. His sister. Sleeping medication. Incorrect. His mother. Whatever Amanda poisoned him with. The lawyer shook his head. Amanda, your answer? I turned my board around. Diphenhydramine, massive dose. The room erupted. She admits it. She knew. Call 911. His brother was already dialing. Wait. A voice from the back interrupted. Dr. Hyatt, Charlie's therapist, stood up. Let her finish. Benadryl, I continued quietly. Fatal when mixed with sertraline, which he took after leaving my apartment. After the harmless tea. After calling Dr. Hyatt to discuss his plan. The police arrived just as Dr. Hyatt stepped forward. Charlie called me that night. 20-minute conversation about ensuring certain people were protected. He was very specific about timing. Protected from what? Charlie's mother demanded. From blame, Doctor. Hyatt said simply. He knew the tea would provide misdirection, make Amanda look suspicious while being completely harmless. You're saying he... His sister couldn't finish. The game isn't over, the lawyer announced. Final question worth the entire estate. What did Charlie leave in his safety deposit box? This wasn't on the board. This was new. Everyone looked confused except Dr. Hyatt, who pulled out a key. Amanda, you have one chance. What's in the box? My hands shook. I thought about that last night. Charlie insisting on tea he hated. Adding honey himself. The strange goodbye. The way he'd held me like he was memorizing it. His journal, I whispered. Correct. The lawyer produced a worn notebook. Shall I read the marked page? Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Rachel Williams held up her hand, and the room went quiet except for Charlie's mother, who kept yelling that I was a murderer. Rachel's voice cut through everything, firm and professional, announcing that the journal was in a sealed safety deposit box at First National Bank, and that its contents would determine the final estate distribution. She explained that Charlie had left specific instructions about when and how the journal should be accessed. His mother screamed that this was all fake, that I had manipulated everything, that her son would never have planned this. Charlie's brother suddenly lunged across the table toward me. Two cousins grabbed him by the arms and pulled him back while he shouted that I murdered Charlie and everyone in this room knew it. Rachel stood up and said she would call security if people couldn't control themselves. The brother kept struggling against the cousins, his face red and veins popping in his neck. Rachel picked up the phone on her desk and said the police were already waiting outside to speak with several people, including me, and that everyone needed to cooperate or face obstruction charges. The room finally went quiet. His mother was crying now, her sister's arm around her shoulders. Rachel gathered her papers and said officers would be conducting interviews in the conference rooms down the hall. She looked directly at me and said I should come with her. Detective Elise Napier introduced herself in a small conference room with gray walls and a table that smelled like lemon cleaner. Her tone was neutral, almost bored, like she did this every day. She wore dark pants and a blue button-up shirt with her badge clipped to her belt. She explained this was an informal conversation, that I wasn't under arrest, but that the circumstances of Charlie's death required investigation, given what came out during the will reading. She pulled out a notepad and pen and sat across from me. Rachel Williams stood by the door with her arms crossed. Detective Napier asked me to start from the beginning and tell her about that night. I took a breath and told her exactly what happened. Charlie came over around 8. We talked for a while about nothing important. He said he wanted something calming, so I made chamomile tea with honey because that's what I had. He left around 10, seeming tired but fine, said he needed to get home and get some sleep. Detective Napier wrote everything down without looking up. She asked if I knew about his medications, and I admitted I knew about the sertraline because he told me months ago when we were still together, said it helped with his anxiety, but made him feel flat sometimes. Detective Napier looked up from her notepad and asked why I knew so many personal details about Charlie's life if we had broken up. I explained we stayed in touch, that I still cared about him even though the relationship didn't work out. I said knowing someone's therapy schedule or what app they use for meditation doesn't mean I wanted to hurt them. She wrote something down that I couldn't see. I asked if I needed a lawyer and she said that was my right, but that I wasn't being charged with anything at this time. She closed her notepad and said someone would be in touch, probably within the next few days. She stood up and told Rachel to show me out through the back exit to avoid the family. Rachel walked me down a different hallway past offices with closed doors and out a side door that led to the parking garage. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, shaking so hard I couldn't turn the key. My hands kept slipping off the steering wheel. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and made everything look greenish and sick. My phone started buzzing with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. I opened the messages and saw people calling me a murderer, saying I should be in jail, threatening to find out where I lived. Someone from the will reading must have posted about it online because strangers were messaging me now. One text said I deserved everything coming to me. Another said they hoped I got what I gave Charlie. I turned off my phone and tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight and small. I needed to get out of this garage, away from this building, somewhere safe. I turned my phone back on and called Allison from work, the only person I could trust right now. She answered on the second ring, and I started crying before I could say anything. She asked where I was, and I managed to tell her about the will reading and the police and the texts. She said to come to her place right now, gave me her address on Maple Street, said she would order food and I could stay as long as I needed. She didn't ask if I did it, didn't hesitate or sound worried about getting involved. I finally got the key in the ignition and drove to her apartment, checking my mirrors the whole way to make sure nobody was following me. At Allison's apartment, I finally broke down and cried for the first time since Charlie died. She sat next to me on her couch and didn't try to fix anything or tell me it would be okay. She just let me cry and handed me tissues when I needed them. I told her everything, about the Jeopardy game and how I knew all the answers, about his family blaming me, about the journal and the detective and the texts. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said we needed to get me a lawyer. I said I didn't know if I could afford one, and she said it didn't matter, that I needed protection whether I got charged or not. She made me eat some pizza even though I wasn't hungry and set up the guest room with clean sheets. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing Charlie's voice asking for tea, seeing his face when he left that night, wondering what he was thinking and why he did this to me. The next morning, Allison helped me search online for lawyers who handled both criminal defense and civil cases. We found 3 with good reviews in offices downtown. I called each one and explained briefly what was happening. The first lawyer said he was booked for the next month. The second wanted a $5,000 retainer up front. The third, Desmond Fraser, said he could meet me that afternoon at 2, and that the initial consultation was free. Allison drove me to his office because I was still too shaky to trust myself behind the wheel. I met Desmond Fraser at his office downtown on the 8th floor of a building with marble floors and security guards. His office was small but organized, with law books lining one wall and a window overlooking the street. He was maybe 50 with gray at his temples and wire-rimmed glasses. Something about his calm, steady way of moving made me feel less like I was about to fall apart. He shook my hand and told me to sit down and take my time telling him everything. I went through the whole story again, from my relationship with Charlie to the breakup to that last night to the will reading. He took notes in a yellow legal pad and never interrupted me. When I finished, he set down his pen and explained that the tea was almost certainly harmless, but that I needed to stop talking to anyone about this case without him present. He said the police, the family, any reporters who might call, nobody gets information from me anymore. He asked about my finances and I told him I had maybe $3,000 in savings, He said he would work with me on payment, and that right now the priority was making sure I didn't accidentally say something that could be used against me later. That evening, Desmond called me at home to go over what would happen next. He said the investigation would focus on 3 main questions, and I needed to be ready for all of them. Did I know about the medication interaction between sertraline and diphenhydramine before Charlie died? Did I have any reason to want to hurt him? Did I give him the pills or tell him to take them? I told Desmond I didn't even know what diphenhydramine was until the lawyer said it at the will reading, that I thought it was some prescription drug I'd never heard of. He said we needed to write down everything I knew and didn't know, make a timeline of every conversation with Charlie in his last few weeks, document exactly what happened that night he came over. The next morning, Detective Napier called Desmond's office requesting a formal interview with me. Desmond told her we needed 3 days to prepare, and she agreed to schedule it for Thursday afternoon at the police station. I took time off work and spent hours at Desmond's office going through everything. He asked about my relationship with Charlie, how we met, why we broke up, when we started talking again. He made me write down every text message I could remember from the last month, every phone call, what we talked about when Charlie visited that final night. We built a detailed record of facts, and Desmond kept emphasizing that I should stick to what I actually knew, not guess about Charlie's thoughts or feelings. Meanwhile, Charlie's family started posting on social media. They didn't use my name directly, but it was obvious who they meant. His mother shared old photos of Charlie with captions about how his killer was walking free while they suffered. His brother posted about the justice system failing families, and how some people get away with murder because they're good at lying. Their friends and relatives shared the posts and added comments about what should happen to people who poison others, increasingly violent suggestions about revenge and street justice. I made the mistake of reading through the comments one night and couldn't sleep afterward. By Wednesday, I knew I had to tell my boss what was happening because the social media posts were spreading, and someone at work would see them eventually. I scheduled a meeting, and the HR representative sat in, taking notes while I explained about Charlie's death and the will reading and the investigation. My boss was sympathetic, said she was sorry for what I was going through, but I could see the worry on her face about what this meant for the company. She asked if I expected to be charged, and I said my lawyer didn't think so, but we were still in the middle of everything. The HR representative said they would support me, but asked me to keep them informed of any developments that might affect my work. That afternoon, Desmond called to say Dr. Hyatt had contacted his office. The therapist wanted to help, but explained he was bound by patient confidentiality rules even after Charlie's death, unless a court legally forced him to share information. And Desmond said we would probably need to subpoena the therapy records, which felt horrible, like violating Charlie's privacy all over again, but it might be the only way to prove what really happened that night. I hated that Charlie's final conversations with his therapist would get dragged into court, but I hated being accused of murder more. Thursday came and I met Desmond at the police station downtown. We went into an interview room with Detective Napier and another officer who didn't say much, just watched and took notes. Detective Napier was professional and methodical, going through everything in chronological order. She asked about my relationship history with Charlie, the reasons for our breakup, why we stayed in contact afterward. She asked about the night he died, what time he arrived, what we talked about, how he seemed, what I served him, what time he left. I stuck to the facts like Desmond had coached me. I didn't speculate about whether Charlie seemed depressed or what he might have been planning. Desmond occasionally interrupted to clarify a question or redirect when Detective Napier asked about my interpretations instead of my observations. Then Detective Napier pulled out a folder and showed me printouts of my internet search history from 2 months before Charlie died. Searches about sertraline interactions, safe medications for anxiety, side effects of antidepressants. My stomach dropped looking at them because I knew how bad it looked. Desmond immediately explained these were harm reduction searches, that I was trying to help Charlie find safer alternatives after he complained about side effects from his medication, not researching ways to hurt him. Detective Napier made notes but didn't comment. After the interview ended and we left the station, Desmond told me the searches looked bad but weren't evidence of intent, especially since they happened weeks before Charlie died, and were clearly informational rather than planning-focused. He said the real question was what the journal said, because Charlie's own words would carry more weight than anyone's guesses about what happened. The next week, Rachel Williams filed a motion to access the journal under court seal for evidentiary review. Her argument was that the contents were necessary to properly execute the will and might contain information relevant to the police investigation. The probate judge scheduled a hearing for the following week. I went back to work and tried to act normal, but I could feel people watching me differently. Some coworkers I'd been friendly with suddenly found reasons to avoid me in the hallways. Others stared when they thought I wasn't looking. At lunch, Allison stayed close, sitting with me in the cafeteria even though I barely touched my food. Someone at a nearby table made a comment just loud enough for us to hear about people getting away with murder, and Allison immediately turned around and told them to wait for actual facts before spreading rumors about things they knew nothing about. The woman looked startled and mumbled an apology, but I could feel my face burning with shame and anger. I got back to my desk and tried to focus on work, but my hands were still shaking from lunch. My phone rang 15 minutes later and I answered without checking the caller ID. The screaming started immediately. Charlie's mother's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me a murderer, said I killed her son, and she would make sure I paid for it, that she knew people who could make my life hell, and she wouldn't stop until I was in prison where I belonged. I hung up without saying anything and sat there staring at the phone for a minute. It rang again. Same number. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times before finally stopping. I walked straight to HR and reported the call. The representative took notes and asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I said yes, and she told me they would change my extension immediately, and that I needed to document any further contact from Charlie's family. She was professional and sympathetic, but I could tell she was worried about the situation affecting the company. I went back to my desk with a new extension number and tried to work, but I couldn't stop shaking for over an hour. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Allison came by twice to check on me, and the second time she brought me coffee and sat with me until I calmed down enough to actually type something. 3 days later, Desmond called with the first real good news since this whole thing started. The pharmacy records came back and they showed Charlie bought the diphenhydramine himself. He used his own credit card at a drugstore 3 blocks from his apartment. The purchase happened 3 days before he died. Desmond said this was huge because it proved Charlie got the medication on his own, that I didn't give it to him or even know he had it. The records showed he bought a large bottle of the stuff, way more than someone would need for allergies or sleep problems. Desmond said we needed to get this information to Detective Napier right away, because it changed everything about the investigation. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Finally, there was actual proof that I didn't do what everyone was accusing me of doing. Desmond warned me not to get too excited yet because the family would probably claim I told Charlie to buy it or something, but at least now there was evidence showing his own actions separate from anything I did. The probate hearing happened the following week, and I sat in the back of the courtroom with Desmond while lawyers argued about the journal. Rachel Williams explained that the journal was in a sealed safety deposit box and contained information relevant to both the estate distribution and the investigation into Charlie's death. The judge was an older woman who looked tired and annoyed by the whole situation. Charlie's family attorney stood up and argued that the entire will should be thrown out because Charlie was clearly mentally unstable when he wrote it, that the jeopardy game proved he wasn't thinking straight. Rachel responded that mental capacity for will execution was a separate legal question from accessing the journal, and that the court needed to review the journal first before making any decisions about the will's validity. The judge listened to both sides and then said she would review the journal privately in her chambers, before deciding what portions were relevant to the estate and what might need to be shared with law enforcement. Charlie's family attorney tried to argue more, but the judge cut him off and said her decision was final. The hearing ended, and I left through a side door to avoid Charlie's family, who were gathered in the hallway looking angry. 2 days after the hearing, Rachel called me while I was at work. She said the judge finished reading the journal and found multiple entries that explicitly stated Charlie's intent to end his own life. The entries described his plan to use the tea visit as misdirection, to make it look suspicious when it was actually harmless. Rachel said the judge was preparing a summary for all parties, and had already contacted Detective Napier to let her know the journal contained information that cleared me. I asked if I could read the actual journal, and Rachel said that would be up to the judge, but that the summary would include the relevant portions. She warned me the family was going to fight this hard, that they would claim Charlie wrote the entries under duress, or that they were fake somehow. I thanked her and hung up feeling relieved but also strange. Part of me wanted to read what Charlie wrote, but another part of me was scared to see his actual words planning the whole thing. Detective Napier called Desmond the next day requesting another meeting. Her tone was completely different this time. We met at the police station again, and she started by saying the investigation was still ongoing, but that the journal entries changed the picture significantly. She asked if Charlie ever talked to me about suicide, and I told her the truth. He struggled with depression, and we talked about it sometimes when we were together, but he never told me he was actively planning to die. If he had, I would have tried to stop him or get him more help. Detective Napier took notes and asked about his therapy with Dr. Hyatt. I said I knew he went to therapy, but he didn't share details about what they discussed because that was private. She asked if I noticed any changes in his behavior in the weeks before he died, and I said he seemed tired and stressed, but not more than usual. The meeting lasted about 30 minutes, and when it ended, Detective Napier said she would be in touch as the investigation continued. Desmond said afterward that this was good, that her tone suggested they were moving away from treating me as a suspect. The judge released the summary of journal entries to all parties a week later. Desmond brought me a copy and I read it sitting in his office. Charlie's handwriting was exactly how I remembered it, neat and precise. The entries started about 2 months before he died. He wrote about feeling trapped by his family's expectations and their complete ignorance about who he actually was. He wrote that he wanted to protect me from blame, while also exposing how little his family knew about his life. One entry said the tea would be perfectly harmless but perfectly suspicious, that his family would immediately assume I poisoned him or drugged him because they always blamed me for everything anyway. Another entry described calling Dr. Hyatt after leaving my apartment to create a clear timeline showing he was alive and functional after our visit. He wrote that the truth would eventually come out through the journal and the evidence trail he was creating. but that there would be a period where I would be under suspicion, and he was sorry about that, but it was necessary for his plan to work. Reading his words made me feel sick. He knew exactly what would happen to me, and he did it anyway. I sat in Desmond's office reading the summary 3 times and feeling more angry with each read. Charlie used me. He made me part of his final act without asking, without caring about what it would do to me. He wrote that he loved me and wanted to protect me, but then he set me up to be accused of murder by his own family. The manipulation was right there in his handwriting. He planned every detail knowing his family would blame me first and believe the truth later. He apparently thought it was worth putting me through hell as long as the truth eventually cleared me. I wanted to scream at him, but he was dead, so all I could do was sit there shaking with anger and grief mixed together. Desmond let me sit quietly for a while and then asked if I was okay. I said no, but I would be eventually. He said that was a normal response and that anyone would be furious reading something like that. The weird thing was, I still missed Charlie even while being completely angry at what he did. Grief is complicated like that. Desmond filed a motion the next week to access Dr. Hyatt's call records and session notes under subpoena. The motion argued that the records were necessary to back up the journal's claims about Charlie's phone call that night. We needed to prove that Charlie actually did call Dr. Hyatt after leaving my apartment like he wrote in the journal. Dr. Hyatt's attorney responded within days saying he wouldn't fight the subpoena if it was properly issued by the court. The response acknowledged that the special circumstances of the case warranted breaking normal confidentiality rules. Desmond said this was good because it meant Dr. Hyatt understood the situation and wasn't going to make things harder by fighting to keep everything sealed. The court approved the subpoena and gave Dr. Hyatt 2 weeks to produce the relevant records. I felt bad about dragging Dr. Hyatt's private notes into all this, but I needed every piece of evidence I could get to prove I didn't kill Charlie. The session notes arrived at Desmond's office 10 days later. They confirmed everything the journal said. Charlie called Dr. Hyatt at exactly 10:47 p.m. on the night he died, which was 20 minutes after he left my apartment. The notes described their conversation in professional language, but the meaning was clear. Charlie told Dr. Hyatt he was calm and resolved about his decision. They discussed final arrangements, and Charlie specifically mentioned making sure certain people would be protected from blame. The notes said Charlie sounded peaceful and that Dr. Hyatt tried to talk him into coming in for an emergency session, but Charlie refused. Dr. Hyatt documented that he assessed Charlie as being at immediate risk, but that Charlie was an adult with capacity who was refusing intervention. The notes ended with Dr. Hyatt writing that he felt helpless but legally couldn't force Charlie into treatment. Reading the notes made the whole thing feel more real. This wasn't just Charlie's version in his journal anymore. Dr. Hyatt's professional documentation backed up everything Charlie wrote about his plan and his timing. 2 days after we got the session notes, Desmond received a letter from Charlie's family attorney. The letter stated that the family intended to file a wrongful death lawsuit against me, regardless of what the criminal investigation found. Their claim was that even if I didn't directly cause Charlie's death, I created the circumstances that led to it. They argued I should have recognized his mental state, that inviting him over that night was reckless given his depression, that I had a duty to protect him, and I failed. Desmond read me the letter over the phone, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. He said this was mostly posturing, that they knew their case was weak, but they were trying to pressure me into giving up any inheritance from the estate. He said we needed to take it seriously, though, because even weak lawsuits cost money to defend, and the process would be stressful. I asked how much it would cost to fight, and he said potentially tens of thousands, depending on how far they pushed it. I didn't have that kind of money, and the idea of going through more legal battles made me want to give up. Desmond said not to make any decisions yet, that we should wait and see if they actually filed, or if this was just a threat to scare me. I walked into work Monday morning and felt the shift immediately. People stopped talking when I passed their desks. Someone turned their computer screen away as I walked by. I grabbed coffee from the break room and heard whispers behind me that cut off when I turned around. By lunch, I'd counted at least 6 coworkers who suddenly needed to be somewhere else when I entered a room. Allison found me eating alone at my desk and sat down without asking. She told me the rumor mill had exploded over the weekend after someone shared screenshots from Charlie's family's social media posts. Half the office apparently thought I'd poisoned Charlie and gotten away with it. The other half thought I was at least partly responsible for not stopping him. I asked if our boss knew, and Allison said yes, that there'd been complaints about having me on the floor. My stomach dropped. I spent the afternoon pretending to work while feeling everyone's eyes on me. Around 3, my boss called me into her office with the HR representative already there. They explained they were moving me to a different floor temporarily for my own comfort, and to reduce workplace tension. I knew what that meant. They were separating me from everyone else because people didn't want to work near someone they thought was a killer. The HR rep said they took workplace harassment seriously, and anyone making direct comments would face consequences, but they couldn't control what people thought or said privately. I packed my desk supplies into a box that afternoon while my coworkers pretended not to watch. Allison helped me carry everything to the new floor, which was mostly empty cubicles used for overflow work. She was furious, saying this was wrong, that I shouldn't be the one punished. I told her it was fine, that I just needed to get through this. The next morning, Allison wasn't at her desk. I texted her and she said she'd been written up for confronting someone who made a comment about me in the break room yesterday. Apparently she'd told them to shut up and mind their own business, and the other person reported her for creating a hostile work environment. I felt sick knowing she was facing consequences for defending me. Desmond called 3 days later saying the toxicology report had come back. His voice sounded different, more relieved. The report showed lethal levels of diphenhydramine combined with sertraline. No alcohol whatsoever, and only trace amounts of chamomile tea that had zero pharmacological interaction with anything in Charlie's system. The medical examiner's notes specifically stated the tea was irrelevant to the cause of death. Desmond had already shared the report with Detective Napier, who acknowledged this essentially confirmed what the journal said. The tea I'd served Charlie was completely harmless. It didn't make him drowsy, didn't interact with his medication, didn't contribute to his death in any way. Charlie had taken the Benadryl himself after leaving my apartment, probably in his car based on the timeline. The toxicology proved beyond doubt that nothing I gave him caused or contributed to what happened. Desmond said this was huge for the criminal investigation, but warned me the family could still pursue civil action. I asked what that meant, and he said we needed to meet in person to discuss it. I sat across from Desmond in his office 2 days later, while he explained wrongful death lawsuits. Even though I wouldn't be charged criminally, Charlie's family could still sue me in civil court. They could claim I was negligent, that I should have recognized his mental state, that inviting him over that night created the circumstances that led to his death. Civil suits had a lower burden of proof than criminal cases. They didn't need to prove I intended harm, just that my actions contributed to the outcome. I asked how much it would cost to defend against something like that. Desmond leaned back and said tens of thousands potentially, maybe more depending on how far they pushed it. Legal fees, expert witnesses, court costs, depositions. Even if I won, I'd still be out all that money. I told him I didn't have tens of thousands of dollars. I barely had a few thousand in savings. Desmond said we could cross that bridge if they actually filed, that sometimes the threat of a lawsuit was just that, a threat meant to pressure me into giving up any inheritance from the estate. But I needed to be prepared for the possibility they'd follow through regardless of the evidence. I called a therapist that night because I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Charlie sitting in his car after leaving my apartment, taking those pills, making the choice that would destroy both our lives. I kept replaying our last conversation looking for signs I'd missed. Had he seemed off? Had he been saying goodbye? Why hadn't I noticed something was wrong? The panic attack started at work. Sudden moments where I couldn't breathe and my heart raced and I was sure everyone could see I was falling apart. The therapist had an opening that week and I took it even though I couldn't really afford it. Her office was small and quiet, and she didn't look at me like I was a murderer when I explained why I was there. She asked what I needed help with and I said everything. That I couldn't stop thinking about that night. That I felt responsible even though everyone said I wasn't. That I was angry at Charlie for doing this to me. She listened without interrupting, and then said something that shifted how I'd been thinking about everything. Charlie made a choice, she said. His choice to end his life was his own, but his choice to involve me without my consent, to use me as part of his plan, to set me up to be blamed by his family, that was harm he chose to inflict on me. I could grieve him and be furious at him at the same time. Those feelings didn't cancel each other out. Desmond called again with new information from the bank. Their records showed Charlie visited his safety deposit box the day before he died. He went alone during business hours and spent 40 minutes inside the vault room. The bank's security footage showed him placing multiple items into the box, including what appeared to be a notebook. The timestamp proved he'd been there less than 24 hours before his death. This supported everything the journal said about premeditation and planning. Charlie hadn't made an impulsive decision that night. He'd prepared everything in advance, written it all down, locked it away where it would be found after. The evidence kept building a picture of someone who'd planned every detail of his death, including how to protect me from blame eventually, while making sure I suffered first. Rachel Williams sent formal notice to all parties that the probate judge had scheduled a hearing to determine if the jeopardy game mechanism was legally valid. The hearing would address how the estate should be distributed given everything that had come out. Charlie's family was fighting to have the game invalidated completely. Their attorney argued Charlie was mentally unstable when he created the will, and that the game proved his unsound mind. They wanted the estate split equally among blood relatives, and me excluded entirely. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out, giving everyone time to prepare arguments. Rachel said the judge would likely uphold the will since Charlie had been under psychiatric care, and his therapist had never declared him incompetent. But the family's challenge meant more legal proceedings, more time in limbo, more chances for them to attack me publicly. More evidence arrived from Desmond's investigator. Credit card records showed Charlie purchased honey 2 days before he died. Not just any honey, but the specific organic brand I kept in my apartment. He'd bought it at a grocery store near his place, paid with his credit card, left a clear paper trail. This meant he'd brought his own honey that night and added it himself to the tea. He'd controlled exactly what went into that cup, staging it to look like I'd prepared everything when really he'd brought his own supplies. The detail made me feel physically sick. I thought about him in my kitchen, carefully adding honey he'd purchased specifically for this purpose, making sure the tea would be exactly what he wanted it to be. Nothing random, nothing spontaneous, every element planned and controlled. A rideshare driver contacted the police about dashcam footage from the night Charlie died. The driver had been parked on my street waiting for a pickup, and his camera captured Charlie's car in the background. The timestamp showed 10:32 p.m., about 15 minutes after Charlie left my apartment. The video showed Charlie sitting in his car, not driving, just sitting there looking at something small in his hands. The video quality wasn't clear enough to identify what he was holding, but the timing fit perfectly with him preparing to take the pills. Detective Napier shared the footage with Desmond, adding one more piece to the timeline. Charlie hadn't driven away and then decided to take the Benadryl. He'd sat outside my building, looked at whatever he was holding, probably the pills, and made his final choice right there within sight of my apartment. Desmond's assistant called saying Charlie's sister had phoned asking to speak with me. After discussing it with Desmond, we agreed to a brief supervised call. She would call his office and I'd be on speaker with Desmond present to make sure nothing was said that could be used against me later. The call happened that afternoon. Her voice sounded tired and uncertain, nothing like the angry woman from the will reading. She said she'd been reading through all the evidence, the toxicology report, the bank records, the journal excerpts. She had questions about what her mother was being told because some of the information didn't match what the family attorney was saying. She asked if we could talk, really talk, about what happened. I looked at Desmond and he nodded slightly. I told her the truth. I loved Charlie. We had problems and the breakup was hard, but I never wanted him dead. I was angry at him for what he did, for using me as part of his plan, for putting me through this nightmare with his family. I explained about the tea being harmless, about him bringing his own honey, about the pills he bought himself. She listened quietly and then said something that surprised me. She said their brother was feeding their mother information selectively, showing her only things that made me look guilty, hiding evidence that pointed to Charlie's planning. Her brother was convinced I'd manipulated everything somehow, that the evidence was fabricated or misinterpreted. She didn't know what to believe anymore, but she wanted to hear my side directly. I asked if she thought I killed him. She was quiet for a long moment, and then said no. She didn't think that, but she didn't know how to reconcile the brother she knew with someone who would plan something this elaborate and cruel. I told her I didn't know how to reconcile it either, that I was still trying to understand how the person I loved could do this to me. We didn't talk much longer after that. She thanked me for speaking with her and said she needed time to process everything. The call ended, and I sat in Desmond's office feeling strange, like maybe one person in Charlie's family might eventually believe I wasn't a monster. 2 days later, Desmond called saying Detective Napier wanted to talk. He put her on speaker in his office, and her voice sounded almost friendly compared to our first conversations. She explained the prosecutor's office had reviewed everything from the journal entries to the pharmacy records to the dashcam footage. The evidence showed Charlie bought the pills himself, took them after leaving my apartment, and planned the whole thing in advance. Criminal charges looked unlikely because there was no evidence I provided the fatal medication or knew he would take it. The case would probably close as suicide within a few weeks once the final reviews finished. I thanked her and hung up feeling relieved but also empty, because official closure didn't erase what I'd been through. The next afternoon, Desmond got a call from an attorney representing Dr. Hyatt. The state licensing board had opened a professional ethics inquiry about whether Dr. Hyatt should have broken confidentiality to warn someone about Charlie's plans. The attorney asked if I would provide a statement saying I didn't believe Dr. Hyatt had information that would have required him to warn anyone. Desmond explained this could help Dr. Hyatt keep his license, but that I wasn't required to get involved. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds before saying yes. Dr. Hyatt had stood up at the will reading and tried to explain what really happened when everyone else wanted to blame me. He'd been in an impossible situation with Charlie, trying to keep him stable through therapy while Charlie secretly planned something Dr. Hyatt couldn't have stopped without destroying the therapeutic relationship. I told Desmond to draft the statement and I'd sign it. The ethics process would take months, but at least my statement might help show that Dr. Hyatt did what he could within the boundaries of his professional obligations. Desmond sent over the draft statement that evening, and I read through the careful legal language explaining that Dr. Hyatt's conversation with Charlie didn't contain specific threats or plans that would trigger a duty to warn. I signed it and sent it back, hoping it would make some difference in a situation where everyone involved had been hurt by Charlie's choices. The workplace situation got worse before it got better. Someone forwarded the family's social media posts to our company's main email list, complete with photos of Charlie and accusations about his killer walking free. I found out when my boss called me into her office with the HR representative already sitting there looking uncomfortable. They showed me the email chain, which had dozens of replies ranging from supportive to hostile. HR had to send a company-wide message about respecting privacy and not engaging in harassment, which only made things worse by drawing more attention to the situation. My boss suggested I take temporary leave, framing it as giving everyone time to cool down, but I could read between the lines. Staying was becoming impossible with coworkers either avoiding me completely or making comments just loud enough for me to hear. I went back to my desk and stared at my computer screen for 20 minutes before calling Desmond to ask about my options. He said I could probably push back and force them to let me stay, but that fighting to work in a hostile environment might not be worth the stress. I talked to Allison during lunch and she was furious about the whole thing, ready to file complaints against everyone involved. But I was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of explaining, tired of feeling like I had to prove my innocence every single day. That afternoon, I went back to my boss in HR and negotiated a 2-month leave of absence at partial pay. It would let me focus on the legal situations without the daily stress of hostile coworkers watching my every move. They agreed quickly, probably relieved to have me out of the office while things settled down. Allison promised to keep me updated on anything important, and to shut down rumors when she could, though we both knew she couldn't control what people said when I wasn't around. I cleaned out my desk that Friday, taking home my few personal items while trying to ignore the stares from the cubicles around me. The following Monday, Desmond received a letter from Charlie's family attorney. I drove to his office to read it together, and he handed me the pages with a neutral expression that told me nothing about what to expect. The letter proposed settlement terms for the civil suit. They would drop the wrongful death claim if I forfeited any inheritance from the estate, and signed a statement saying I should have recognized Charlie's mental state and done more to prevent his death. Desmond watched me read it twice before speaking. He said this was actually progress because it meant they knew their case was weak. They were trying to get something through settlement rather than risk losing in court and getting nothing. I asked what would happen if I refused, and he explained they'd probably file the lawsuit anyway, which would mean months of depositions and legal fees and more public accusations. The statement they wanted me to sign was carefully worded to avoid admitting legal liability while still giving them something they could point to as acknowledgement. I told Desmond I needed time to think about it, and he said we had 2 weeks to respond before they'd file the lawsuit. I spent those 2 weeks going back and forth, angry that they wanted me to sign anything that suggested I was responsible, but also exhausted by the idea of fighting them in court for months. Allison said I should tell them to go to hell, that signing anything was letting them win. My therapist said only I could decide what would let me move forward with the least damage. In the end, I told Desmond I wanted to wait and see what happened with the probate hearing before deciding about the settlement, because the inheritance question might resolve itself anyway. The probate hearing happened 3 weeks after the will reading, and the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Charlie's mother sat in the front row with his brother, both of them staring straight ahead and refusing to look at me. His sister sat a few rows back, and when our eyes met briefly, she gave a tiny nod that might have been acknowledgement or just a nervous tick. The judge reviewed the will's language, the jeopardy game mechanism, and the journal entries that explained Charlie's intentions. Rachel Williams presented arguments about why the game was legally valid under the will's clear instructions, while the family's attorney argued Charlie had been mentally unstable, and the whole thing should be thrown out. The judge listened to both sides, asked a few questions about the journal's authenticity, and whether Charlie had been under duress when he wrote the will, then announced his ruling. The jeopardy game mechanism was unusual but legally valid because the will's language was clear, and Charlie had been competent when he created it months before his death. However, the judge noted that the will included provisions for charitable donations, and that the final distribution would need to account for Charlie's stated intentions in the journal about protecting certain people and exposing others. I wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but Desmond seemed satisfied with the ruling. Then the judge said there was one more matter to address. The journal contained a sealed letter addressed specifically to the court, and the judge had decided to read it aloud as part of the hearing record. The courtroom went completely silent as the judge opened the envelope and pulled out 2 handwritten pages. The judge read Charlie's words in a flat, professional tone that somehow made them hit harder. Charlie wrote that he had planned his death carefully and took full responsibility for it. He designed the Jeopardy game to force his family to confront how little they knew about his actual life, while protecting me through the eventual revelation of the truth. He explained that he knew the tea would look suspicious but was completely harmless, that he bought the pills himself and took them alone in his car, and that he called Dr. Hyatt specifically to create a timeline showing he was alive and functional after leaving my apartment. He wrote that he expected his family to blame me initially, and that he was sorry for putting me through that, but that he needed someone to look suspicious so the investigation would uncover all the evidence of his planning. The letter ended with instructions about the estate distribution, including specific amounts for mental health organizations, and a statement that I should receive my portion only if I chose to accept it, with no obligation or judgment either way. When the judge finished reading, nobody moved or spoke for several seconds. I felt sick hearing Charlie's voice through those words, understanding fully for the first time how he'd used me as a prop in his final performance. Charlie's mother made a choking sound and started crying, her whole body shaking with sobs that filled the quiet courtroom. Her attorney and Charlie's brother tried to comfort her while she kept repeating that she didn't know. She didn't know any of it. I felt genuine sympathy for her grief in that moment, despite everything she'd said about me and done to me over the past weeks. She'd lost her son, and then discovered she hadn't really known him at all, and that double loss was visible in every sob. The judge called a recess and everyone filed out into the hallway except Charlie's mother, who stayed in her seat crying while her attorney spoke quietly with her. Desmond and I waited in a small conference room down the hall, not talking, just sitting with the weight of what we'd heard. When we returned to the courtroom 30 minutes later, the family's attorney approached Desmond and said they needed time to discuss their position on both the will contest and the civil suit. The judge agreed to adjourn for 2 weeks to let everyone process the letter and consider their next steps. I left the courthouse through a side exit, avoiding the main doors where I'd seen news cameras setting up. The story was apparently interesting enough to attract media attention now that the dramatic will reading and journal revelations had become public record. A week later, Desmond called saying he'd received official notice from Charlie's family attorney. They were dropping the wrongful death suit entirely but demanding I receive no inheritance from the estate. Their attorney framed it as a moral position rather than a legal one, writing that it would be wrong for me to profit from Charlie's death even if I didn't cause it, and even if the will designated money for me. Desmond read me the exact wording over the phone, and I could hear the careful legal language trying to claim moral high ground, while backing away from claims they knew they couldn't prove. He asked what I wanted to do, and I surprised myself by laughing. The whole thing was absurd. Charlie had manipulated everyone involved, used me as bait for his family's anger, put me through weeks of suspicion and investigation, and now his family wanted to punish me by taking away money I'd never wanted in the first place. I told Desmond I didn't want the inheritance anyway, that taking it would feel like accepting payment for being used in Charlie's final act. We could work out the details of donating it or redirecting it to the mental health organizations Charlie had specified, but I wasn't going to fight his family over money that felt tainted by everything that had happened. Desmond listened to me explain this over the phone, and I could hear him typing notes as I talked. He suggested we could structure the donation as part of the estate settlement, which would make it official and prevent any future disputes about whether I tried to profit from Charlie's death. We spent the next hour going through options for mental health organizations that focused on suicide prevention and support for people dealing with depression and anxiety. I picked 3 organizations that Charlie had mentioned in his journal, places he'd researched but never reached out to for help. Desmond said he'd draft the paperwork and coordinate with Rachel to make it part of the final estate plan. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I recognized as the police station. Detective Napier's voice sounded different from it had during the investigation. Lighter somehow, less careful. She told me the prosecutor's office had issued a formal statement that morning, declining to file any criminal charges against me. The evidence was clear that Charlie had bought the medication himself, taken it himself, and done everything possible to make his actions look independent of anyone else. She said the case file would be closed as a suicide with no suspicious circumstances. I thanked her, and she paused before saying she was glad the investigation reached the right conclusion, that she knew these past weeks had been hard on me. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at my phone for a long time. No charges meant I wasn't going to be arrested or prosecuted, but it didn't erase the accusations or the suspicion or the way Charlie's family looked at me. The next morning, I woke up to an email from an address I didn't recognize at first. The subject line said, "From Sarah Williams," and my stomach dropped when I realized it was Charlie's sister. The email was short, maybe 5 sentences total. She wrote that she'd read all the evidence the family's attorney had compiled, including the journal entries and the pharmacy records and the phone logs. She said she believed the evidence and that she was sorry for what I went through during the investigation and at the will reading. But then she wrote that her mother would never accept what the evidence showed, that the grief was too much and someone had to be blamed. She ended by saying she had to support her family even though she personally believed I didn't hurt Charlie. I read the email 3 times trying to figure out how I felt about it. Part of me appreciated that she acknowledged the truth, but another part was angry that she wouldn't stand up to her mother or brother. I typed out a response thanking her for reaching out, then deleted it. I typed another version saying I understood family loyalty, then deleted that too. Finally, I just closed the email without responding, because there wasn't anything meaningful to say that would change the situation. A week later, Desmond called saying Rachel had filed the final estate distribution plan with the probate court. The plan gave Charlie's mother, brother, and sister each about $70,000 from the estate. Another $200,000 went to the 3 mental health organizations I'd picked, split evenly between them. My portion, which would have been around $150,000, was contingent on me signing agreements donating it all to the same mental health groups. Rachel had also included provisions for covering all the legal fees and court costs from the estate before any distributions happened. Desmond asked if I wanted to review the paperwork before the court hearing, and I told him I trusted his judgment and would sign whatever needed signing. The hearing was scheduled for 10 days out, giving Charlie's family time to review the plan and raise any objections. I went back to work during those 10 days, trying to rebuild some sense of normal routine. My boss had been understanding about the leave, but I could tell he was relieved to have me back and functioning. The probate hearing happened on a Thursday morning in a different courtroom than where the journal reading had occurred. I sat with Desmond at one table while Charlie's family's attorney sat at another. Rachel stood at the front presenting the estate plan to the judge, explaining each distribution and the reasoning behind it. The judge asked a few questions about the charitable donations and whether they aligned with Charlie's stated wishes in the will. Rachel referenced specific passages from the will, and the journal showing Charlie had wanted substantial portions to go toward mental health causes. Charlie's mother wasn't there. Her attorney explained she was too upset to attend and had authorized him to represent her interests. Charlie's brother sat in the back row, and when I glanced back once, he was staring at me with the same angry expression he'd worn at the will reading. His sister sat next to him but didn't look at me at all. The judge reviewed the paperwork for what felt like forever, flipping through pages and making notes. Finally, she announced that the estate plan was reasonable, aligned with the will's provisions, and properly accounted for all the interested parties. She approved the distribution and set a timeline for the transfers to happen over the next 60 days. Rachel would oversee everything as executor, making sure all the payments and donations went through properly. The hearing ended, and I left through a side door to avoid any chance of running into Charlie's brother in the hallway. 3 weeks after the probate hearing, Desmond forwarded me a letter from Dr. Hyatt's attorney. The state licensing board had concluded their ethics inquiry into his handling of Charlie's case. They issued a formal caution about documentation requirements and consultation procedures in high-risk cases, but decided not to suspend or restrict his license. The letter included a brief note that Dr. Hyatt had asked his attorney to pass along. He thanked me for the statement I'd provided to the ethics board, and said he regretted the entire situation, both Charlie's death and the aftermath that had affected so many people. I filed the letter away and tried not to think too much about how many lives Charlie's final act had damaged. My leave of absence ended officially on a Monday morning in late spring. Walking back into the office felt strange, like returning to a place I'd left years ago instead of weeks. HR had apparently done some kind of sensitivity training while I was gone, because there was a memo in my inbox about workplace harassment and making assumptions about ongoing investigations. Most of my coworkers were awkward around me, but not actively hostile. They'd ask careful questions about how I was doing, then change the subject quickly when I gave vague answers. Allison met me at my desk with coffee and a genuine smile. She filled me in on everything I'd missed, both work projects and office gossip. Later, she told me she'd been pushing back hard against the rumors and speculation while I was gone, shutting down conversations when people started making accusations or assumptions. She said several people had apologized to her for believing the worst, and that my reputation had mostly recovered once the prosecutor's statement came out. Our friendship felt stronger after that, built on her having my back when things were terrible. The mental health fund launched 6 weeks after the estate distribution went through. The 3 organizations I'd picked had coordinated to create a joint fund in Charlie's name, focused specifically on medication safety education and suicide prevention for people dealing with depression and anxiety. They sent me an invitation to the launch event and asked if I wanted to be involved in any public way, maybe speak about Charlie or help with fundraising. I declined the speaking part because I didn't want to be the face of this story or have to explain our relationship and his death to strangers. But I agreed to attend planning meetings and help shape what the fund would focus on. It felt like the only meaningful thing to come out of the whole nightmare, turning Charlie's estate into something that might actually help people, instead of just enriching his family or me. Summer came and I realized I hadn't visited Charlie's grave since the funeral. I drove to the cemetery on a Saturday morning 3 months after the will reading. His grave was in a newer section with a simple flat marker showing his name and dates. Someone, probably his mother, had left flowers that were starting to wilt in the heat. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what to say. All the profound statements I'd imagined on the drive over felt fake when I tried to form them into actual words. I was still angry at him for the manipulation, for using me as a prop in his final performance, for not caring about what his death and his plan would do to me. I was also sad that he'd been suffering so much and hadn't found another way out. I was processing the trauma of being accused of murder by people who were also grieving the same person I'd loved. Nothing about it was simple or clean or resolved. I left a small bouquet of flowers next to the wilting ones and walked back to my car feeling slightly lighter, like I'd acknowledged something important even if I couldn't articulate what it was. Therapy helped me understand that I could grieve Charlie and be furious at him at the same time, that these feelings didn't cancel each other out or mean I was handling things wrong. My therapist walked me through setting boundaries around what I would carry emotionally and what I refused to accept responsibility for. I couldn't control that Charlie had chosen to die. I couldn't control that he'd manipulated the circumstances to cast suspicion on me. I couldn't control his family's grief or their need to blame someone. But I could control how much energy I spent trying to convince people of my innocence, how much I let their opinions affect my daily life, and whether I let Charlie's final act define my future. 3 months passed before I heard from Charlie's sister again. She sent a text asking if we could meet for coffee. No pressure, just to talk. I stared at the message for a full day before responding because I wasn't sure what she wanted or if this was some kind of setup. Desmond said it was my choice but to meet in a public place if I decided to go. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Saturday morning, and the first few minutes were so awkward we both just stirred our drinks without talking. She finally said she'd been thinking about everything that came out during the investigation and wanted to understand who Charlie really was, since the journal showed how much his family didn't know him. I told her about our relationship, the good parts and the fights, how he could be thoughtful one day and completely shut down the next. She shared stories about their childhood that explained some of his patterns, how their mother's expectations crushed him, how their father left when Charlie was 12 and he never really processed it. We talked for 2 hours, and by the end, neither of us was crying, but we both looked tired. She said she couldn't be my friend because of her mother, but she wanted me to know she believed the evidence and didn't think I hurt him. I thanked her, and we parted in the parking lot with an understanding that this was probably the only conversation we'd ever have, but it mattered that we had it. The social media posts about me started disappearing gradually as other scandals took over people's feeds. Someone would still comment occasionally on old posts calling me a murderer, but the active harassment stopped once the prosecutor's statement went public. I made my accounts private and stopped searching my name obsessively every morning to see what new accusations had appeared overnight. My therapist helped me understand that some people would always believe I was guilty, no matter what evidence existed, and I couldn't control that, or waste energy trying to change their minds. I focused instead on the people in my actual life, the ones who knew me and stood by me. Allison remained fiercely loyal, shutting down any workplace gossip she heard, and making it clear that spreading rumors about me would damage friendships. My routine slowly returned to something approaching normal, though I still had bad days where the weight of everything felt crushing. My boss called me into her office 6 weeks after I returned from leave and said they were starting a new project that needed someone detail-oriented who could handle complex data analysis. The project had nothing to do with legal issues or investigations, just pure technical work that required intense focus for months. I jumped at the chance because it gave me something concrete to work on that filled my brain with problems I could actually solve. The work was demanding enough that I'd go home exhausted but satisfied, having spent 8 hours thinking about databases and algorithms instead of death and accusations. My performance reviews that quarter were the strongest I'd had in years, and my boss mentioned during our check-in that she was considering me for a senior position opening up in the next year. The promotion possibility felt like proof that my career hadn't been permanently destroyed by the investigation, that I could rebuild my professional reputation through good work. I threw myself into the project with an intensity that probably wasn't entirely healthy, but it beat sitting at home replaying the will reading in my mind. The Mental Health Fund held its first public event 9 months after the estate distribution finished. They sent me an invitation and asked if I wanted to speak, but I declined because I didn't want to be the face of Charlie's story or have to explain our relationship to strangers. I did attend, though, sitting in the back row of the community center while speakers talked about suicide prevention, medication safety, and support resources for people dealing with depression and anxiety. The presentations were informative and respectful, focusing on practical help rather than dramatic stories. I noticed Dr. Ed Hayat sitting in the back on the opposite side of the room, also keeping a low profile. Our eyes met briefly across the space, and we exchanged a small nod of acknowledgement without speaking or approaching each other. We both knew why we were there and what we'd been through, but neither of us needed to discuss it publicly or make it about us. The event drew about 50 people and raised several $1,000s in donations. Afterward, I slipped out the side door without talking to the organizers because I'd done what I came to do, which was witness that something positive had come from all the pain. One morning, about a year after Charlie died, I woke up and got ready for work, and was halfway through my commute before I realized I hadn't thought about the investigation or the accusations yet. That sounds like a small thing, but it was huge because for months those thoughts had been the first thing in my mind every single day. I'd wake up already anxious, already replaying conversations with Detective Napier, or remembering Charlie's mother screaming at me in the lawyer's office. But that morning my brain had just moved through normal thoughts about work deadlines and what to eat for lunch. The trauma hadn't disappeared and I still had rough days, but it was no longer the constant background noise of every waking moment. I mentioned this to my therapist and she said it was a sign of healing, that trauma processing doesn't mean forgetting but rather integrating the experience so it doesn't dominate everything else. I started noticing more moments like that over the following weeks, whole afternoons where I was fully present in what I was doing instead of half distracted by memories of being accused. I met someone new through a friend's party about 14 months after everything happened. We started talking about normal things like work and hobbies, and there was an ease to the conversation that I hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. We went on a few dates, taking things slowly because I wasn't ready to rush into anything serious. On our 4th date, I told him about Charlie, the whole story including the investigation and accusations. He listened without interrupting, asked a few questions to understand better, and then said he appreciated me trusting him with something so difficult. He didn't treat me like I was damaged or fragile afterward, didn't ask endless follow-up questions or act weird around me. It felt like a small but important step toward trusting people again, proof that I could be honest about what happened without it defining how someone saw me. We kept dating casually, and I was careful not to move too fast, but having someone new in my life who knew the truth and didn't judge me for it helped me feel less isolated. Desmond forwarded me an email from Charlie's family attorney about 18 months after the estate closed. The family wanted to stay informed about the mental health fund's work, and requested quarterly reports about how the money was used. The tone was formal and distant, but not hostile, acknowledging their grief and their son's legacy without making accusations about me. I agreed through Desmond to have the fund organization send them quarterly updates, maintaining appropriate distance while respecting that they had a right to know how Charlie's estate was helping people. It felt like a reasonable boundary, giving them information without requiring direct contact between us. The fund coordinator told me the family never attended events or got involved beyond receiving the reports, but knowing the money was used properly seemed to matter to them. I thought about Charlie's sister sometimes, and wondered if she was the one who pushed for this arrangement, trying to find some middle ground between her mother's anger and the reality of what the evidence showed. 2 years after Charlie died, I deliberately drove past the street where his accident happened. I'd been avoiding that area completely, taking longer routes to get places just to not see the intersection. But one Saturday I decided to test myself and see if I could handle it. My heart rate picked up as I approached the street and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, but I kept driving at normal speed without stopping or turning around. I didn't have a full panic attack, didn't need to pull over and call someone. I just drove past, acknowledged the tightness in my chest and kept going. It felt like proof that I was healing even though the scars would always be there. I didn't make a habit of driving past that spot, but knowing I could do it without falling apart mattered. By the time 2 full years had passed since that night at the lawyer's office, I was genuinely okay. Not perfectly healed, not without complicated feelings about everything that happened, but functional and moving forward with my actual life. I'd learned that some stories don't have clean endings where everything gets resolved and everyone understands each other. Being cleared of wrongdoing didn't erase the experience of being accused, didn't undo the months of people thinking I was a murderer, didn't fix the relationship with Charlie's family. I carried the truth of what happened without letting it define everything I was or control every decision I made. The Mental Health Fund helped dozens of people every year with medication safety education and suicide prevention resources. Allison and I were closer than we'd been before all this, because she'd proven herself when things were terrible, and that kind of loyalty deepens friendships. I had a job I was good at with real promotion possibilities ahead. The person I was dating had become more serious, and we were talking about moving in together, building something new that had nothing to do with my past trauma. I still thought about Charlie sometimes, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep, or on the anniversary of his death. The anger had softened into something more like sad acceptance that he'd made choices I couldn't control, and that I'd survived the aftermath of those choices. He'd manipulated the situation to expose his family's ignorance and protect me eventually, but he hadn't cared about, or maybe hadn't fully understood what those months of suspicion would do to me. I'd never know if he thought it through that far, or if he just assumed the truth would come out quickly and easily. What I did know was that I'd built a life that felt stable and authentically mine, that I'd learned to set boundaries, and refuse to chase forgiveness from people who would never give it, and that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating difficult experiences into a larger story that included joy and purpose and connection. So there's your complete picture of how this unfolded legally and emotionally. If this helped you understand the process better, definitely like the video. Subscribe for more thorough examinations of complicated real-life scenarios. Seriously, comment what situation you want analyzed next.